Welcome, Masters and Padawans, to a very special Full of Sith for Podathon 24. I'm Brian Young, and Holly's not with me. She's going to be doing the other half of Full of Sith. But I do have with me a very special guest, Matt Martin from Lucasfilm.
Hey.
Long time no see.
Yeah, really. So how did I end up with you and not Holly? I feel ripped off.
It's because I have your number and she has Pablo's.
Okay, that's fair.
And now I feel bad. Like now you feel ripped off because of me.
Joking.
Okay. Sure. But for Podathon 24, raising money for Make-A-Wish. So obviously you've got the QR code on your screen and whatnot. But give whatever you can. But in the meantime, Matt and I are just going to talk about Star Wars, which is something I'm told we're both pretty good at.
It's like the one subject of conversation that I can actually do. If it veers off of Star Wars, I'm just going to be kind of quiet.
It's true. I've seen this. And it's interesting too. Like, do you ever find that, like, I mean, you work with Star Wars, you work at Lucasfilm, you're on the story team. What's your title at the moment, actually?
Senior Creative Executive.
And so that means you're working on a lot of stuff like the comics, the video games, publishing, Disney parks, just to make sure it all aligns with Star Wars and the story, right? Like that's the general gist of your job description?
Yeah, more or less. And animation too.
And animation too.
Yeah, I'm kind of here both helping with sort of the overall strategy of it all with, the rest of my team, as well as kind of lore and connectivity across all of the various Star Wars storytelling, again, with our little lore group that includes Pablo, who you guys are going to talk to.
And so, like, I guess the question is I talk about Star Wars a lot from the other side and some of the inside, like I'm doing little bits of writing and things here and there. But I find that, like, I never actually get exhausted or tired of talking about Star Wars. Is that something you find?
I mean, I do. Like, it's one of those things where, like, it's like I said, it's the one thing that I can actually feel confident in holding a conversation. So I'm definitely, I'm pretty introverted, and I'm not just like out there being boisterous, talking to everybody about everything. But like when it's a subject that I'm really passionate about, it can really open me up. And Star Wars is one of those things where it's just like, okay, you want to talk Star Wars? We should probably get chairs.
Yeah, no, there's definitely been very late nights we've both had doing exactly that. And it's funny because you'll see the eyes of everyone we're with just like deaden because, oh, Brian and Matt are doing that.
Yeah, like it always starts out with like people are listening and interested in, and they're into it. And then we tend to go down rabbit holes that everyone else just stops caring about. Yeah. And then it's like we're kind of in our own little world, and their conversation goes on without us.
So I want to ask one question that's sort of a little behind the scenes-y. And then I just want to ask some Star Wars stuff and just have us talk some Star Wars and maybe see if we can find some leap-eye holes.
I don't know what that phrase means.
Well, I figured you just used rabbit holes and leap-eye.
Oh, okay.
I
see what you mean.
If there was anyone on Earth who would catch that joke,
say leap-eye?
Yeah. How do you pronounce it?
I've always said leppy.
Leppy?
But I don't know, actually,
because I always thought it was a pun
so I actually don't know.
I always thought it was a pun for leaping high.
You're probably right. The whole character is a pun.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. But I'm just wondering, like, you've been on the story group, you've been on the story team and a creative executive for a long time now. And I'm wondering, what is the biggest sort of evolution you've had since you've been in that position? Because I know you didn't start in that position. We first met when you were doing StarWars.com and stuff. But as you've been on the story team and as Star Wars storytelling has evolved and gotten so much bigger, how has your job evolved, and how has that interaction with the other pieces of Star Wars evolved?
I mean, we do so much more now. I mean, we've always done a lot of Star Wars storytelling, but I think I've been here to kind of watch it just really explode. And because of that, we've kind of had to divide and conquer things a bit more than when I first started. Like everybody on the team kind of, was in some way, shape, or form attached to just about everything. There would be people that were lead and more responsible for certain things, but essentially everything would come, across my desk. Now it's more separated in only because there's just so much of it, and I think that's been the biggest change. What's interesting for me as like a lore person and just a Star Wars nerd in general is that even if it's a project that I'm not necessarily on, I still feel like I have to take it in because I need to understand it. So it's like on paper, I think I have, I wouldn't say less work, but less projects maybe than I would have had at one point. But it's definitely no less work. In fact, it's probably more.
So are there aspects of Star Wars that you can enjoy almost like a fan, sort of closer to after the fact then?
To an extent, the live action series have largely been that. I'll often get, a look at them early, but sometimes, I don't, either don't have time or don't have access to a script or something. So when I get to see an early cut or whatever, that does end up being the first time I've seen it. And that's like one of those rare times where I can really enjoy it. Some of the other things like Lego is a good example that because I'm not on it and it is not part of the kind of mainline continuity, I almost try to avoid it. Like if they have a specific question for me or whatever, I'll look at whatever they need, if they're referencing something that I did work on. But for the most part, those Lego things are something that I can just kind of wait and see as a fan when it comes out. And that's, fairly gratifying, but it does feel rare.
So I know we've talked about this a lot about how things, one of the aspects of your job is making sure that things feel like Star Wars. And I'm wondering, over the time you've been on the story group, what has been the project that's come out that you've enjoyed the most, that you thought felt the most exemplary of Star Wars? And I figured that could be that opening rabbit hole into just some lore nerdery.
That's interesting. Maybe Jedi Fallen Order. I feel like that really hits on kind of all of the tenets while still, being its own thing with its own set of characters. It doesn't feel like an imitation of a Star Wars that but it's still tonally aligned with, with all the films and very authentic, if that makes sense.
And you worked on those pretty closely, right?
Yeah.
Those are fun games. I really enjoyed the last one with one minor gripe, but it's not even worth.
I think you already griped to me about that.
I did. I definitely did. I definitely did. But I was going to save it from the recording. But I mean, I might as well say it now because everybody's like, "Oh, well." It was just I didn't feel good in my heart about making Cal take that turn into the dark stuff. Like I was just like, that should be a choice, and I should be able to choose not to do that because it hurts my heart to play the bad guys in the games. It really does.
We talked about that so much in the room, and I was very much on the same page as you because I tend to always go very light side in any situation. So when it comes up and it's basically like press this button to do the bad thing, even when I played it myself, I'm like, I'm just gonna wait and just wait. I know eventually I'm gonna have to press that button. But I think putting me through that added to the experience in a way, and it allowed me to sort of leave my own mindset and get into Cal's mindset at the time, and in a way that made it more immersive to me. So ultimately, I liked being forced into making that choice, and I think it was the right decision. But at the time, I definitely struggled with it too, both as we were doing it and the first time I fully played through it.
Yeah, no, it gave me some heartburn. It's I've played that game a lot less than the other one just because like
you can't get through it again.
Yeah, like it was rough. As far as like watching stuff, and being able to experience it that way, do you have a favorite a favorite one of the movies or an episode of any of the TV shows or anything like that that really just sort of spoke to you as like, this is great Star Wars?
I mean, I'm trying to think. Like, it's all great in its own way. I think what's cool about Star Wars, and I think maybe what draws me to it so much, is that Star Wars has always been sort of a mashup of other stories and other genres. And now that we do so much storytelling, each story is sort of turning up the volume on a different genre.
Yeah.
And because of that, I experience and enjoy each thing in a slightly different way, but no, they're not lesser. You know what I mean? So there isn't like a particular thing that jumps out at me because I do really enjoy them in completely different ways.
That's one of the things I love about Star Wars is that like the universe stretches really well to just about anything where you can skin it as a Hitchcock movie, or you can do a send up of Predator or Aliens, or you can do Buck Rogers, or you can take a John Ford movie, or you can take Kurosawa, or you can take a murder mystery or an episode of CSI or anything.
Yep.
And Star Wars has a way for it to fit.
Yeah, it's such a great I don't want to undersell it, but it's such a great backdrop for pretty much any type of story that you want to tell, because the world is so fleshed out that you can kind of understand or extrapolate how something that in the real world would be in the world of Star Wars, and it gives it like a unique flavor, but it's still familiar at the same time. I think that's part of why Star Wars works for so many people, is because it is easy to understand and familiar yet different.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's definitely, it feels a little intuitive, and I know Pablo has said once that like a lot of that comes from not just the storytelling techniques, but like the level of technology that I felt like he mentioned. And correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe you've got a different take on this. Is that the rule of thumb for putting in technology is like it's got to be something that a viewer from World War II would be able to like grasp pretty easily, to latch onto and understand how it would work. Otherwise, it's probably too much for Star Wars.
Yeah, we do still try pretty hard to adhere to that. As far as we definitely don't try to avoid any technology uh, that wouldn't have existed at the time that George was writing Star Wars, and
Mm-hmm.
certainly look to World War II in that era as kind of where the most clear analogs are. Obviously, there's the fantasy elements like hyperspace. That
Light
is,
speed skipping.
yeah, like those are just pure fantasy. But for the most part, when it comes to tech, it's very kind of straightforward analog in a way that might actually feel slightly more foreign to our younger audiences, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, yeah. It is actually interesting to look at how Star Trek has kind of reversed that, where Star Trek, all of the technology in Star Trek started really big and bulky and analog, and as audiences have been catching up with technology, they haven't continued sticking to that. They've shrunk it all down, but Star Wars keeps on that. Um, but I think that speaks to what you're saying, though, where Star Wars is very much a fantasy analog, and Star Trek is very much sci-fi.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of dividing line between the two, because sci-fi always needs to speak to like a future of some sort, not necessarily literal future, but technological future or whatever. And it always needs to sort of showcase that forward thinking, where Star Wars, it says it right at the beginning, a long time ago, it is very much meant to be set in an era. And as such, the technology can't grow so exponentially. Obviously, as storytelling goes, we have to evolve things, or we'll have need for new tech that we didn't have in A New Hope. But it always goes through that lens of like, okay, how do we get this piece of tech that we envision through in a more analog, more 40s way?
I think that's one of the interesting things that I've noticed about interesting, and I imagine it would be challenging things about the High Republic era, where you're devolving this already analog World War II kind of feeling technology back even further. You know, I think of that moment in Charles Soule's Light of the Jedi where it's just like they're networking droids up in massive fields to try to get the processing power and things like that, where, you know, in the status quo of Star Wars, I guess that would be much easier.
Probably, yeah. But I mean, it's definitely technology in Star Wars is sort of stagnated. Like it definitely doesn't move at the same pace that it does in the real world. So, you know, High Republic is not that far off technologically. Like we do see moments where something like that, you know, your droid example, or like Bacta, just kind of Bacta as, you know, a health aid, just now kind of coming into fruition there. But for the most part, we deliberately didn't try to, you know, devolve most of the tech too much. The same way that, like, if you look at the prequels, it almost looks more technologically sound than the OT, and there's a lot of reasons that that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's very much like each different era kind of has its tech that is kind of like in vogue almost. Like it's less about what could be made or what could be created or a natural evolution of tech, and more what do the people of that era need? What are their priorities?
Yeah, no, like all the communications droids and things like that, and
Yeah.
the way interstellar communication works in High Republic.
Yeah.
You brought up a point about the prequels, and I always kind of laughed at that criticism where people are like, "Oh, it looks too shiny. I can't believe this." And really, it takes that much work to go, "Oh, that's actually just a contrast for how bad the dark times were."
Exactly.
Like things went so far downhill. Everything's a box with an engine on it now, and back then everything was more elegant and shiny.
Totally. It's really like you could see that same sort of evolution in the real world. Like
Yeah.
look at like classic Russia with their cool, you know, big castles and things versus like Cold War Russia where everything is, you know, boxy and brutalist. And, you know, if you look at those two things, you're going to think that one is inherently more pretty and ornate and, you know, arguably better than the other. But, you know, the boring one is the one that is more current.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the prequels. I don't know if you knew this. I don't know if
Those
you
are
knew
good
this, Matt.
movies.
Yeah, there's some good movies.
I heard one of them's coming back in the theater soon.
Yeah, no. Well, it would have been yesterday, so I would have caught Phantom Menace as people are watching this for my 78th time.
I was just gonna ask.
Yesterday.
78th in a theater?
Yeah.
That is very impressive.
I mean, I've told you, like I used to work at a movie theater, and I was the manager and projectionist, and I would purposely make the last showing of Phantom Menace start about 10 minutes late, and I added a few extra trailers to it so that I could get all my work done. And by the time I'd had the money counted and the deposit ready to go and in the safe and all my employees gone, I was just ready to hit a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And so I would just watch Phantom Menace on my shift because I'd have to sit there until all the movies were out anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great system. I saw it 27 times, but I had to pay for it all. So
I probably paid about that many times because, like, I think I saw it 7 times opening weekend. It is really, I'm really struggling with the fact that movie was 25 years ago.
Yeah. You know, I might actually have you beat in one stat. I saw it 7 times in one day.
Okay. I think
opening day, I saw literally every screening that was mathematically possible.
So I probably would have, but the way the theater limited tickets was that you could only get like 7 shows for the time that you went up to the box office, and some ridiculous person, which was me, had gotten in line so far in advance that there was this frenzy for it, and there was literally like 600 or 700 people in line.
But you created the frenzy?
I mean, like,
inadvertently?
I got in line first, and that was weeks before the movie came out, and the news showed up, and then more people showed up. And the thing I loved about that line was that the last like 2 weeks was pretty much just a Star Wars block party with 150 people.
Yep.
And the thing is once you got your tickets, you didn't go anywhere because you had to get in line for seats because they didn't have assigned seating. I don't think people remember that. And I remember how much I paid for a ticket, and it's like I'm lucky to find a matinee ticket for that price now. I paid, and I remember being mad about it because they jacked up the price 25 cents from $6 for an evening ticket to $6.25 just for Phantom Menace.
That's funny.
And now, yeah, if you can find a matinee for $6.25, that's lucky.
Yeah, not even like dollar theaters are that cheap anymore. They're not. I guess they're not called dollar theaters anymore because they are no longer a dollar.
Yeah, well, I don't even know where any are. Like all the ones, like I worked at one. That was where I got Phantom Menace, which is part of why I got to see it so many times, is because after it got out of first run, it was just in the dollar theaters forever, until they pulled it because they did that re-release in like January.
Oh, yeah.
And then we got it all over again.
Yeah.
So it was just like I was in heaven. And then after that second spate, I learned that they were just going to take all the prints and destroy them to make the film strips that go in the widescreen VHS sets. So I was like, if they're going to destroy these anyway, I'm going to take a whole bunch of this. So I cut out so much of Phantom Menace before I sent it back.
That's awesome.
And maybe I shouldn't be admitting this, but I've got a 35mm reel of all the lightsaber duels.
Oh, that's amazing.
Not that I have anywhere to play it anymore, but back then, 25 years ago, I was like, I'm never not going to work at a theater or have access to a 35mm projector. And George Lucas really torpedoed that for me.
It's because he was trying to stop people from stealing his movies.
I really think it was just because he hated going to see a movie on the second weekend and seeing a scratch in a print. It's funny. I don't think people realize how much George Lucas pushed just how much like theater technology we take for granted now.
Yeah.
That it was literally his fault because he was annoyed that the quality he was getting at Skywalker was not what people were experiencing in theaters.
Oh, that's great.
Do you see Lucasfilm still working on making those sorts of pushes now that George is gone?
I think so. Maybe not at the theater level. Because I'm not sure how much further we can push theaters at this point. It's a struggle to get people into theaters in the first place. So I think it's more other kind of behind the scenes technology. Mando is probably the best example with
the volume,
the stagecraft. That tech is really cool and allows them to do something that, make a show that looks the way it does on a budget that, probably would never have been, or a look that would never have been able to be done on the budget that it's currently on.
I think that's something that's been interesting about ILM and Lucasfilm over the years, is that they would always try to push that. Like Young Indiana Jones was that same thing, right? Like it was that test bed of how can we cheat as much of this as possible, as cheaply as possible, so this TV show looks way better than anything else on TV.
Yeah. And it almost ends up being like an experiment for what they end up doing in Phantom Menace. Like they learned so much from that. So nothing is wasted at ILM, which is cool.
Yeah. I don't think people give enough credit to Radioland Murders and Young Indiana Jones for like everything that came after.
Yep.
Do you have a favorite thing like that? Like where it's just like, oh, that's where that came from, some bit of technology or storytelling or whatever. And it could be in the parks too. I know you're a huge parks nerd.
I mean, if you were talking technology in the parks, Rise of the Resistance, that attraction pulls together so many different types of tech that I think without a franchise as big as Star Wars, we never could have made an attraction of that scale if it wasn't for something like Star Wars. So I think that's one of those things that I really appreciate, because that brings the park experience, or like what we know we can do, in a theme park to a whole other level that, without Star Wars probably never would have happened.
Yeah, yeah. Rise of the Resistance is pretty amazing.
It really is. It's bonkers. Like every
Yeah.
time I go on it, I'm just amazed at all of the different pieces of tech. And working on it, I'm not an engineer or anything close to an engineer, but working on it, I more or less understand how everything functions. And it's like knowing the magic trick does not detract from the magic in that case.
There's so much good design in that ride. Whether it's like if you're in the car that's heading against the AT-AT head on or the one to the side, unless you've been on the ride multiple times, like you don't realize there's two fins there.
Yeah.
Because the sight lines are so well managed and things. I don't know, like that kind of stuff always blows my mind that there's somebody that thought that deeply about it.
Totally.
To take care of those little things like that.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite effects in that ride is such an obvious thing, but the fact that no one ever did it before, at least that I'd seen, blew my mind, which is the moment where Kylo looks like he's like stomping at you. He's like coming down a dark corridor, and it looks like a natural thing. It's not like an animatronic with kind of a weird walk. And it's purely like they just do a really bright flash, so that way your eyes quickly go like, whoa, bright, makes everything else look dark, and then this essentially projected version of Kylo looks like he's really walking at you, and you don't see any of the surrounding because of that big flash. It's like it's just like a very simple optical trick, but it totally works.
Yeah, no, Disney's really good at that kind of stuff. It's amazing to me, and I mean they do that on everything, right? Like not that specific trick, but like Pepper's ghost on the Haunted Mansion is still mind blowing, even though it's like so obvious.
Totally.
Simple tricks are the best ones.
Yep.
As you've been working on Star Wars for so long, what is something that's come out that you think hasn't gotten the attention it should have, that's flying under the radar, that deserves more love and attention?
I was just thinking about this with something, and now I can't remember what it was.
So you can't even pay it that much attention.
I think it was one of those things that it did sort of come and go, and not that people disliked it just didn't get the attention, exactly what you're saying. But it was a few years back, so that's why I don't remember it, because I'm constantly in sort of the future of Star Wars, because I'm always looking at things that will be coming out in the future. So it's hard for me to even track what has come out or remember specifically what they were. Man, what is it? I still think Young Jedi Adventures is something really special, and it's found its audience, but it's not as big as I feel like it deserves to be. And I think that's probably just a matter of time, just the nature of that type of programming for kids.
And I think I love it, but like anything competing with Bluey right now is hard in that age range.
Totally.
Because like I'll watch with my kid, and we'll watch a couple episodes of Young Jedi Adventures, and they'll be like, okay, time for Bluey. And it's like, but we have more of this. And it's like, well, we can watch more of that later, but Bluey.
Yep. And I can't even, like, Bluey's very, very, very good. So I can't even like be mad about it.
Yeah. I kind of feel like Solo is like that sometimes. I'll talk to people and they've still missed it, or like, oh, I didn't watch that one or whatever. And I was so surprised the year it came out, talking to people after it had already left theaters, and they were like, oh, I'm really excited to see that. It comes out at Christmas, right? And it was like, no, it came out like 4 months ago.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't know. That movie's so fun.
It is super fun.
Yeah. But I think we're running close to time that we have with you, and so Holly can have some time with Pablo. Is there anything about the future of Star Wars that you're actually allowed, that's been announced, that you can talk about being excited for in any way, shape, or form?
I mean, I'm always excited for things. I'm super excited for Star Wars Outlaws.
Mhm.
That's been announced. It's out relatively
Yeah.
soon.
No, I'm
Uh,
excited for that too.
yeah, that the idea of just kind of living in Star Wars has always appealed to me. So I've been kind of hoping for an open world game like this for a really long time.
I mean, if we can't have the Star Cruiser anymore, I guess it's
Yeah,
the next best
exactly.
thing.
And I was very into Star Wars Galaxies at the time, and that was probably the closest thing that we had back then to an open world Star Wars. So super excited for that. Let me think. What else? I'm really excited about the droids that we have now at Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland. Those droids are amazing and super cute and never get old, and just like crazy tech.
I gotta tell you, those are cool. Like my kid plays, my youngest plays Fallen Order with me and Survivor with me, and they love it. And they were there with me at the press day for, and we saw the BD units, and they were really excited until they realized Cal Kestis wasn't going to be there with them, and which I thought was very funny.
Yeah, that's actually a good problem to have because I like that Cal has had that effect on people. Like I love going to conventions and seeing how many people cosplay Cal across gender lines too, which is amazing. Like you can be anybody and Cal can be like your Jedi, and I think
Yeah,
that's sort of the power of an interactive medium like video games where like you are actually embodying this character and you get a sort of connection to them in a way that you don't necessarily get in other media, and I think that's just really cool.
with you knowing my tastes in Star Wars and what I like more than anything, should I be as excited for the Acolyte and Skeleton Crew as I am?
Yes, I think you
Okay.
should be. Knowing
Okay.
you, I definitely think you should be.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. It was just a nice gut check because I'm like stupid excited for both of them. And I don't know. It feels weird that like we got way more Skeleton Crew at Celebration than Acolyte, but now Acolyte's coming and Skeleton Crew. It seems like we haven't heard anything since Celebration.
Gotta let Acolyte have its moment before we start ramping up the other thing.
Yeah.
Acolyte was actually still shooting, at least doing pickups during Celebration.
Yeah.
So
That's kind of why I figured.
probably why is because they, had a thing to make, so they weren't so involved in promoting it.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. But thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, even when it's in these brief sessions, and even when the recording is on. So thank you so much, Matt.
For
and
sure.
Then we'll pick it up from there. So thank you, everybody. Make sure you do what you can for the Podathon and the QR code there on the screen.